So Tom Parker BS is driving around with Princess Diana's private letters in his car trunk. And the excuse he gave for having them is honestly more confusing than the discovery itself. Like if you're going to get caught with some of the most sensitive documents in modern royal history, you'd think you'd have a better story ready. But no. When King Charles lifted that trunk lid at the palace and found folders marked Diana Confidential, the explanation that followed was basically, someone gave them to me for a book project. A book project. The man is a food writer. He reviews restaurants. He writes about cheese and roast chicken. And we're supposed to believe that confidential government files and Diana's personal handwritten letters just happened to land in his lap as research material. That's where it gets weird. Before we get into all of that, if you love unpacking royal drama and the stories that don't make the official press releases, hit that subscribe button and join us here at Crown Watch. We break down everything the palace wishes you'd forget. Okay, back to the mess. So, let's set the scene properly because the context makes this whole thing even stranger. This wasn't some random Tuesday. This was the night of a grand banquet at Buckingham Palace. We're talking golden lights, chandeliers, world leaders, ambassadors, celebrities. The kind of event where every fork placement is planned and every smile is rehearsed. Charles had finally become king after waiting longer than any heir in history. And this banquet was supposed to be his moment to show strength, to show that the monarchy was steady under his reign. William and Catherine arrived looking immaculate. She in this steep emerald gown that caught every camera flash. Charles and Camilla walked in hand, her silver gown shimmering, the crowd cheering politely. And then Tom Parker BS pulled up in his sleek black car, sharp suit, carefully combed hair, just another name on the guest list. Except to William, he was never just another name. He was the living reminder that Camilla's family had woven itself into the fabric of the monarchy. And you could see it in William's jaw the moment Tom stepped out of that car. Tight, controlled, watching. The dinner itself went through the motions. String orchestra playing softly. Endless table covered in white cloth and crystal glasses. Toasts about unity and history and the bond between nations. Tom sat only a few seats away from Charles, laughing easily, chatting with ministers about food and restaurants and life outside palace walls. Some guests found him charming. William didn't. To William, that laughter felt out of place, like a sound that didn't belong in the royal hall. And Harry wasn't even there to witness any of it. Across the ocean, he'd chosen a different life, one far from palace dinners and forced smiles. His empty chair was its own kind of statement. So the night carried this undercurrent of tension that the cameras couldn't quite capture, polite on the surface, boiling underneath. When the banquet ended and guests began filtering out into the London night, Charles excused himself, told Camilla he needed air. He walked through the palace corridors, footsteps echoing against marble, and stepped outside into the crisp courtyard. Guards stood at their posts, silent and watchful. The line of black cars gleamed under the lanterns, and that's when he noticed Tom's car. The trunk wasn't fully shut, just a small gap, almost invisible, but enough to draw attention. At the palace, where security is tighter than anywhere else in Britain, nothing is ever left unsealed. Every vehicle gets checked. So why was Tom's trunk open? Charles frowned. He glanced around. No one was watching. He stepped closer, hesitated for just a moment, then lifted the trunk lid. Inside, hidden beneath a dark cloth, were stacks of documents and sealed envelopes tied with red string, old, worn, marked with stamps from government offices, and sitting right on top, almost like it had been placed there to be seen, was a single folder with bold letters across it. Diana, confidential. Charles staggered back. His face went pale, his breath caught. He didn't even have time to process what he was looking at before a voice cut through the silence behind him. "William, father, what are you doing?" And then William's eyes moved past Charles to the open trunk, and the shift in his expression was instant. Shock first, then something much sharper. Fury. So, here's the core contradiction that makes this entire situation unravel. Tom's explanation was that he didn't steal anything. He said someone gave him the files. A man he'd worked with before. Someone who deals in rare documents, supposedly told him he had information about Diana and that people would pay millions for it. Tom claims he didn't believe him at first, but when he saw the documents, he took them just to keep them safe. Safe in his car trunk at a palace banquet where anyone could have found them. That's not safekeeping. That's not even good hiding. That's carrying around explosive material in the one place where discovery would cause maximum damage. If you genuinely wanted to protect Diana's legacy and keep these documents out of the wrong hands, why would you bring them to Buckingham Palace? Why wouldn't you lock them in a safe? Why wouldn't you immediately notify Charles or palace security? The logic completely falls apart the moment you apply any pressure to it. And William applied pressure. He pointed at the trunk, voice shaking with rage, and told Tom to explain why his mother's personal letters, government reports, and secret files were sitting in Camilla's son's car. "Don't lie to me," he said. "These are private files about my mother. Where did you get them?" Tom's response was that he was told they were for a book project. A book project? William's disbelief was palpable. "You expect us to believe this? That Diana's personal letters were handed to you for a cookbook?" That line alone tells you everything about how absurd this moment was. Tom is a food critic. His entire professional identity is built around restaurants and recipes. The idea that someone approached him with classified royal documents for a literary project doesn't just stretch credibility, it completely ignores how any of this works. Sensitive documents don't just float around the rare manuscript market waiting for food writers to scoop them up. If someone actually had Diana's confidential letters, they'd go to the press. They'd go to a publisher with a track record and royal biographies. They'd go to someone who could pay the millions Tom mentioned. They wouldn't hand them to the queen consort's son and say, "Here, use these for your next book about pasta." Charles tried to mediate, but you could tell he was torn in two. On one side, his son, the future king, voice filled with rightful anger. On the other, his wife Camilla, the woman he'd fought so hard to protect, and her son, now tied to a secret that could bring ruin to the crown. When Charles pulled out a single envelope and opened it with trembling hands, he found a letter written in Diana's handwriting. Familiar, elegant, unmistakable. These weren't just records. These were fragments of Diana's private thoughts from her darkest days. His hand shook. He could barely continue reading. And William watched all of this, his fury building with every second. His father hesitated. "This ends now," William said. "Either we confront him tonight or I will. But one thing is clear, Father. If you protect him again, you will lose me." That's not a threat made lightly. That's the heir to the throne drawing a line in the marble and telling the king exactly what the cost of loyalty to Camilla's family would be. The timeline here matters because it shows how fast this escalated from private discovery to public explosion. That confrontation in the courtyard happened late at night after the banquet. By dawn, the news had reached Camilla. A single message whispered through the halls. "The trunk has been opened." She sat up in bed, silk sheets falling around her, and immediately knew what it meant. Her aide confirmed it. William knew. He'd seen the letters, and her son Tom was the one who'd been caught with them. Camilla's reaction was pure panic. She clutched the edge of the bed, rings digging into her skin, and whispered, "Diana's letters in Tom's car." This was her greatest nightmare coming true. Diana's shadow, the ghost that had haunted her entire relationship with Charles, had risen again in the most dangerous way possible. And William, the boy who had once glared at her with silent hatred, now had proof to fuel his anger. She rushed through the palace corridors, slippers brushing against stone, every portrait on the wall seeming to watch her with judgmental eyes. When she reached the courtyard and saw Charles standing by the car, looking years older, gray with despair, and Tom lingering nearby, silent and ashamed, she fell apart. "You fool," she told her son. "Do you know what you've done? You've destroyed everything. You've ripped open wounds that never healed. You've given William the weapon he has always wanted." Tom tried to explain again that he hadn't stolen the documents, that he was keeping them safe. And Camilla's response cut through all of it. "Safe? You called this safe? Locked in a car trunk waiting to be discovered. Safe from whom, Tom? From William? From the king? From me?" And honestly, that's the question that still doesn't have a satisfying answer. Safe from whom? If the goal was to protect these documents from being exploited, bringing them onto palace grounds was the single worst decision possible. If the goal was to eventually reveal them, then hiding them in a trunk doesn't make sense either. If the goal was to sell them, the timing and location are bizarre. None of the possible explanations line up with the actions. That's what makes this feel less like an accident and more like something that was waiting to be found. Camilla collapsed onto a stone bench, sobs tearing through her chest, her body shaking. She turned to Charles, voice raw and desperate. "He will hate me forever, Charles. He always hated me. But now he has a reason. He'll tell the world I destroyed his mother. He'll turn the people against me. The crown will slip from my head before it's even secure." And then she said the words that reportedly chilled Charles to the bone. "Diana has won. Even in death, she has won." That's the line that tells you where Camilla's head was at. This wasn't about the documents anymore. This was about a decades-long competition she felt she could never win, a ghost she could never outrun, and the realization that her son's actions had just handed that ghost the victory she had always feared. Meanwhile, William wasn't done. He'd left the courtyard, but the storm inside him was still raging. He told his father, "Tomorrow I will tell Catherine everything, and if Camilla doesn't know yet, she will. You cannot bury this father. You cannot protect him. Not this time." And then, in what became the turning point of the entire crisis, William decided to go public. For 2 days, the palace tried to contain it. Reporters crowded every corner, microphones raised, questions cutting through the air. Is Prince William fighting with the king? Did Camilla's son really take Diana's private letters? Has the monarchy fallen into another scandal? The palace issued no statement. Silence was meant to protect them, but silence became the loudest answer of all. And then William stepped out of Kensington Palace, with Catherine at his side, and he broke the wall. Normally, William waves politely, says a few careful words, retreats. Not this time. His eyes were cold, his shoulders stiff, his jaw locked in fury. He raised his hand for silence, and shockingly the press obeyed. His voice was steady but carried fire. "I will not speak long, but I will speak the truth. My mother's memory deserves it." The reporters leaned forward. "Recently I discovered personal belongings of my late mother, Princess Diana, hidden in a place they should never have been. These were her private letters, her private fears, her private heart. They were not respected, they were not safe." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Catherine lowered her eyes, hands tightly clasped. William continued, voice sharpening. "I will not go into details today, but I want the world to know this. My mother's dignity will not be silenced. Not by this palace, not by anyone." And then he turned away, refusing to say more. Catherine placed her hand on his arm, guiding him back inside. The damage was done. Within an hour, every news station in Britain, and then across the world, flashed with headlines. Prince William breaks silence on Diana letters inside Buckingham Palace. Chaos exploded. Advisors shouted across tables. Phones rang endlessly. Statements were drafted and redrafted, none strong enough to stop the wildfire spreading outside. Charles sat in silence, face pale, hands pressed together. Every word from William's mouth cut him deeper. He had begged his son to keep the matter private. William had chosen the world instead. And here's where the broader pattern becomes clear. This wasn't just about one trunk or one night. This was about years of unresolved grief, unspoken anger, and a family structure that had papered over its cracks with polite smiles and rehearsed photographs. William had spent his entire adult life playing the role of the disciplined heir. He smiled in front of cameras. He pretended everything was fine. He stood beside Camilla at events and never publicly acknowledged the pain her presence caused him. But that trunk, those letters, Diana's handwriting, it broke something in him. It made him say out loud what he'd only ever expressed in silence. All my life, I've had to pretend this family was whole. But it wasn't. It was broken the moment you chose her over Mom. That's what he told Charles in the courtyard. That's the wound that's been festering for decades. The trunk just ripped the bandage off. The public reaction was immediate and fierce. Crowds gathered outside palace gates, holding pictures of Diana. They chanted her name as if she had returned from the grave to stand against the monarchy once more. Social media flooded with images of her, old interviews, her famous lines about being the people's princess. For many, it felt as though she had risen again, her spirit carried in the fury of her son. American networks replayed William's statement on every channel. Commentators debated whether this was the beginning of the monarchy's collapse. Newspapers carried split photos. On one side, a smiling Diana, on the other, tear-stained Camilla. The headlines wrote themselves, and the people chose sides. Most stood with William. Some defended Charles. Very few stood with Camilla. Charles, facing the greatest crisis of his reign so far, made a desperate gamble. He decided to address the nation directly. His advisors warned against it. Too dangerous to admit there were letters. Too dangerous to confirm William spoke truth. But Charles cut through them all. No more lies, he said. If we hide, we fall. If we stay silent, we burn. The people must hear from me. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Camilla begged him not to do it. If you speak of her, you will bury me. Every word you say will place Diana above me, even in death, and the people will never forgive me. Charles looked at her with tired eyes and said, "Tonight, I am only a father, a broken father." His speech was short, but every word carved deep. He stood in the throne room, cameras blazing, and spoke not as a king, but as a man. He admitted that Diana's personal letters had been found in a place they should never have been. He admitted it had caused deep hurt to his family, most of all to William. He said Diana was the mother of his children, that she would always be honored, always be remembered, always be respected, and then he said the words that stunned the nation. "Any failure to protect her memory is my burden and mine alone. I ask for patience, I ask for healing, and I ask for my son to forgive me." The reaction was instant. Crowds across Britain cheered his honesty. For the first time, many felt Charles had spoken with his heart, not with rehearsed words. But others turned their tears into chants for Diana, raising her name as if she were still alive. The press praised his courage, but asked dangerous questions. If Charles admits failure, is Camilla fit to be queen? If William is the defender of Diana's memory, should he lead sooner than expected? Inside the palace, Camilla collapsed in tears. She felt stripped bare before the world, her crown slipping like sand through her fingers. Tom cursed under his breath, knowing the blame for the trunk would never leave him, and William sat in his study with Catherine and listened to his father's words in silence. When it ended, he didn't cheer, he didn't curse, he only whispered, "At last." He finally spoke the truth. Catherine touched his hand and asked, "So, will you forgive him?" William stared at the dark night beyond the window. His jaw was tight, his eyes still fierce. "I don't know," he said. "The truth has been spoken, but truth alone does not heal." And that's where the story really lands. Not on the discovery, not on the confrontation, not even on the public explosion. It lands on the fact that a family built on silence and image management finally had its walls broken down by a trunk that wasn't fully shut. Tom Parker BS may or may not have had innocent intentions. Maybe someone really did give him those documents. Maybe he really did think he was keeping them safe. But the way it all played out, the open trunk, the palace banquet, the timing, the book project excuse, none of it adds up to a clean explanation. What it adds up to is a family that has never properly dealt with its grief, its guilt, or its ghosts. Diana's letters were locked away in archives, but her memory was never really buried. It was just waiting for someone to lift the lid. Catherine, watching all of this unfold, wrote in her private journal that night, "I love my husband, but I fear for him. I fear that his anger, if not calmed, will become the very thing that destroys him. The world may want us as their king and queen, but I only want peace for our family. I pray he remembers that the crown is not a prize, it is a burden, and burdens, if carried with anger, will break even the strongest man." She closed the book and blew out the candle. The room felt dark, but the weight of everything that had happened didn't lift because the trunk was closed again, but the questions were still wide open. Who really gave Tom the files? Why now? What else was hidden among those papers? And most of all, what would do with the fire his mother's memory had reignited in him? The monarchy survived the speech, survived the headlines, survived the night. But the fracture between father and son, between past and present, between the crown and the truth, that didn't heal. It just stopped bleeding long enough for the cameras to look away.